Hi guys, welcome to today's video. Now this is a very special video as I have two stories. The first story, I already forgot what it was, hold me a second. The first one is of a guy who does flooring services with his cousin, and on one of their contracts, while they were cutting up some old carpet, they come across this door that is sealed and locked away, but there seems to be something behind that door, something supernatural. Now, the second one is of a security guard who is working the night shift trying to earn some money while they are in school. It is here, through their contact with the supernatural, that they are able to solve the case of a missing person. Thank you to the viewers who sent these stories. If you would also like to share your stories, please send them to the email listed in the description below. And without further ado, let's get started. This happened to me when I was still doing flooring work around the Twin Cities. At the time, I worked with one of my cousins who did small renovation jobs for homeowners, landlords, and anyone who wanted their house to look expensive without actually paying expensive house money. We did carpet removal, vinyl plank flooring, trimming, small repairs, and things like that. It was honest work, but it also meant we spent a lot of time inside strangers' houses, and you learn pretty quickly that every house has a feeling to it. Most houses feel pretty normal. Some feel messy, some feel warm, some of them smell like dogs, and a few of them actually smell like fish sauce. So I don't know how that happens, but every now and then you walk into a house and your body reacts before your brain does. You step inside and immediately feel like you should apologize for being there, even though you were invited and you have an invoice. That was how this particular townhouse felt. This job was in one of those quiet townhouse neighborhoods where every unit looks almost the same from the outside. Beige sidings, small front porch, an attached garage, a little patch of grass, nothing really special. The owners were a young couple. Let's call them me and Daniel. They had just bought the place from an older family who had moved out recently. They told us that they wanted the old carpet removed and replaced with this sort of plank flooring before they finally move in. That part sounded pretty normal. Every new homeowner wants gray floors now, and I don't know who decided every house in America needed to look like a dentist's office with better lighting, but apparently we all agreed. We got there at around 8:30 in the morning. Me met us at the door with coffee and apologized that the place was messy, even though it looked pretty empty. Daniel was upstairs taking measurements for blinds or something, and the downstairs had an old tan carpet. The kind that looked clean from far away, but then it makes you question humanity when you pull it all up. The walls had fresh paint and there were cardboard boxes stacked in the kitchen. At first, nothing seemed too strange, but when me walked us through the job, she pointed upstairs and said, "You can do the hallway and the bedrooms, but don't open the room at the end yet." I asked, "Is the door locked?" She hesitated and said, Kind of. The previous owner left some stuff in there, but we haven't gone through it yet." That was already pretty odd. Usually, when people sell a house, they clear out all their belongings, unless they're hiding something, abandoning something, or making it the next owner's spiritual problem. I didn't ask too many questions. We were there to do some floors, not investigate some family dramas. Now, my cousin and I, we carried our tools inside and started downstairs. For the first couple of hours, everything was pretty normal. We cut the carpet into strips, rolled it up, pulled out the staples, and complained that our knees hurt because this is basically half of the job. The owners were polite. They stayed out of the way, and every once in a while, we heard them talking quietly upstairs, but nothing really weird happened. Then we got to the stairs. As I was pulling carpet from the first landing, I noticed a smell coming from upstairs. It was faint at first, like incense, but old incense. Not fresh, like not the ones that someone had just lit it up, but more like the one that stays in the room after years of smoke and prayer and closed doors. I looked at my cousin and he looked at me like he smelled it too. He then asked if they were doing a blessing up there or something, and I told him that maybe they should. He laughed, but not fully, and we kept on working. At around noon, the owners left to grab food for everyone, but before they left, Me reminded us again to not open the last upstairs room. She said it lightly, like she didn't want to sound bossy, but her eyes went toward the staircase when she said it. That's when I knew that she wasn't just worried about storage. After they left, the townhouse became quiet. Not a regular quiet either. It was the kind of quiet where every tiny sound feels a little too clear. The scrape of a utility knife, the click of pliers, my cousin breathing through his nose, and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I kept feeling like somebody was upstairs listening to us. We finished the stairs and moved into the upstairs hallway. At the end of the hall was the room that Me told us not to open. The room was closed, and now that I was standing closer, I could kind of see why she said it was kind of locked. The door wasn't locked with a normal lock. It was sealed. There was red string tied across the doorknob and looped around a small nail on the trim. There was old joss paper that had been taped along the doorframe, but it was faded and curling at the edges. Someone also put painter's tape over the gap beneath the door, like they were trying to stop air from coming out or something from crawling under. My cousin stared at me and said, "Tao, that is not a storage room, dude." I told him, "It's okay, just don't touch it." He said, "I wasn't going to. I'm dumb, but I'm not horror movie dumb." We started pulling carpet from the hallway, working carefully around the sealed door. The carpet padding near that room was darker than the rest, almost like water had leaked on there before. I cut into it and peeled it back. Underneath it, there was a small pile of burned rice grains. At first, I thought it was mouse droppings or dirt, but then I saw the pieces clearly. Rice, burned black at the edges. Mixed in there were folded pieces of joss paper, a tiny silver bracelet, and a strip of white cloth with some strange writing on it. I stopped moving. My cousin leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Is that a kid's bracelet?" I took a closer look, and indeed it looked like one. It was the kind that people would put onto little kids sometimes, the one with little bells that barely made a sound when they moved. I didn't want to touch it, but I had already uncovered it, and the moment I did, the air in the hallway changed. The incense smell got stronger. Then, from behind the sealed door, something hummed. It was soft, a child's voice. Not singing words, just humming a little tune under its breath. My cousin and I both stood frozen in the hallway, still crouched over the torn carpet padding. I whispered, "Hey, they said nobody was in there, right?" My cousin whispered back, "Dude, don't ask me that. I don't know." The humming continued for a few seconds and then stopped. Now, I know some people might say that maybe it was some sort of pipes or the wind or a neighbor's kid outside, and I would love for that to be true. I really would. But I have heard pipes, I've heard wind, and I've heard kids, and this humming was coming from inside that dang room right behind the taped door. It stopped the moment that my cousin shifted his weight and the floor creaked. We decided to leave the hidden objects alone until the owners came back. That was the smart choice. But the problem was, we still had a job to do, and we were already behind on schedule. So we moved farther down the hallway and kept pulling carpet, trying to act normal, and that lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then, one of my pry bars disappeared. I had set it on the floor next to me. I know I did because I had just used it to pull some tack strip. I reached for it and it was gone. I looked around, checked under the carpet roll, checked near my tool bag, and nothing. My cousin said that maybe I left it downstairs, but I knew I hadn't. I decided to go back down anyways to check because sometimes you would rather doubt yourself than admit that a house is playing tricks with you. When I came back upstairs, the pry bar was lying in front of that sealed door, straight across from the threshold, like someone had placed it there. My cousin was standing at the other end of the hall, pale. I said, "Dude, did you move that?" He shook his head. Then, from inside the sealed room, a small voice whispered something in Hmong. It said my cousin's old name. Not his regular name, not the name that customers knew, and not even the name that most of our cousins used anymore. It was the name that he had previously before he had his name changed. It was the one that only the family really knew. My cousin looked at me, and I could see his eyes getting wet. He wasn't crying exactly, but his body was doing that thing where fear starts pushing tears out before your pride can stop it. He said, "We need to go." I agreed, but before we could grab our tools, the front door opened downstairs. The owners were back with food. The second they walked in, the voice stopped. The incense smell faded a little, and the hallway felt almost normal again, which somehow made it worse because now we had to explain why two grown men were standing upstairs like we had just seen the IRS with a machete. Me called up and asked us if we were okay, and I looked at my cousin and he shook his head like he didn't want to talk. So I went downstairs and I, politely asked me who lived there before they moved in. She looked at Daniel at first, and Daniel looked a little uncomfortable. Then she said that the previous owners were an older Asian couple, but their adult children handled most of the sale. She said that the parents had moved to California or maybe to stay with relatives, but the story kept on changing on whoever they asked. I then asked about the room. Me admitted that they had never opened it. During the final walkthrough, the seller's son said that it was a prayer room and asked them to not disturb anything until a family elder came to collect the items. But no one ever came. Me said that she and Daniel planned to deal with it later after moving in. I then told him that there were things moving under the carpet by that door. When I described the rice, the spirit money, bracelet, and cloth, Me's face changed. She put the food down and called her mother immediately. She spoke in Hmong really fast, the way people speak when they're trying not to panic but are absolutely panicking. Daniel stood there, looking at all of us, clearly understanding enough from our faces to know that lunch was not going to fix this. Her mother told us not to throw anything away, to not step over the bracelet, to not touch the cloth, and then she told me to call someone older who knew more because this was not just old junk. That was when I called my grandma. I know it sounds dramatic, but in Hmong families, when something spiritual happens, you don't go to Google first. Google is good for fixing a sink and diagnosing your cough as 12 different diseases, but for this kind of thing, you call grandma. I told her about everything. I told her about the sealed room, the things we found, and how something had called my cousin's old name. She then got quiet for a long time. She asked if the bracelet had bells, and I said yes. She told me to listen very carefully. She said that sometimes when a child dies young, or when a child's soul is believed to be unsettled, families may keep certain objects, offerings, or ritual items to call and guide and protect, to hold that spirit until the proper ceremony is done. She said that she didn't know exactly what happened without being there, but if those things were hidden under the carpet door, then someone may have tried to keep the spirit in that room. So I asked her, what should we do? And she told us to put everything back, give it an offering, and tell it that you're not family and you cannot take it, then leave before dark. That last part made my stomach drop because it was already after 2 or 3 p.m., and the winter days up north don't exactly give you a lot of sunlight to work with. We did what she said, and the couple grabbed some snacks and candy to create as an offering. I used my gloves to gather the joss paper, the burned rice, and all those items that were under the carpet, and the whole time, the sealed room stayed quiet. But not empty quiet, more like listening quiet. Me placed the offering near the door, and I put the objects back on top of the padding where I had found them. My grandma stayed on speaker and told us what to say. I repeated it in Hmong as best as I could, basically explaining that we were only workers and we did not belong to the house and we weren't trying to take anything, and whatever is there should not follow us. When I said that last part, something tapped on the inside of the door. Once. Me started crying, and Daniel put his arm around her. My cousin was already halfway down the stairs pretending to organize tools, which I didn't judge because emotionally I was right there with him. We packed up fast and we did not finish the job. I told Me that I was sorry, but I wasn't charging her for the day and I wasn't coming back until her family dealt with that room properly. She didn't argue. Honestly, I think she wanted to leave too. As we carried the last tool bags to the van, I looked back at the townhouse. The upstairs window at the end of the hall was facing the driveway. The curtains were closed, but for 1 second, I saw the fabric move, like a small hand had pressed against it from the inside. I got in the van and told my cousin to drive. He said, "You're driving." I said, "Nope, not today, dude." So we sat there arguing for 5 seconds like idiots, while possibly being watched by a ghost of a child. And then my cousin finally drove because fear is a very powerful motivator. It wasn't until some time later that my cousin and I found out that the couple moved out a couple weeks later. I heard from a cousin that their family brought some elders and a shaman to do a ceremony before they left. I don't know what happened after that. I never really asked for too many details because sometimes knowing more does not make you feel better. For a while, I thought that that was the end of it. Then something started happening with my work van. Every morning, when I opened the back doors, I smelled incense. Not strong, just faint, like someone had burnt it hours earlier and shut the doors. At first, I blamed the tools. Maybe the smell got into the bags from the townhouse, so I cleaned everything. I wiped down all the pry bars, the drills, knee pads, toolboxes, even the extension cords. But the smell still came back. Then, one morning, I opened the van and found my tools arranged in a circle. In the middle of the circle was an empty space, just about the size of that little silver bracelet. I stared at it for a long time. Nothing moved, nothing whispered, and nothing jumped out. It was just tools on the van floor, arranged too neatly to be accidental, with that faint incense smell sitting in the cold morning air. Immediately after that, I called my grandma. She told me to park the van outside, leave the doors open, and to say out loud that if anything had followed the tools, that it needed to go back where it came from, that it didn't belong there. And so I did exactly that. Afterward, the incense smell slowly faded. The tools stopped moving, and my cousin refused to ride in my van for almost a whole month, which was annoying but honestly understandable. To this day, I still do flooring work, but I have rules now. If a homeowner says to not open a room, I don't open it. If I see joss paper or religious things or anything tied to the door, I ask the homeowners questions before touching anything. And if something under the carpet looks like it was hidden there for a reason, I leave it alone. These houses can remember more than people think. A renovation can cover old stains, and new flooring can hide old things. Fresh paint can make a place look brand new. But if something was left behind spiritually, it doesn't care how modern the kitchen looks or how clean the walls are. It knows where it was placed, and it knows who has disturbed it. And sometimes, like me, if you had brought the wrong tool to the wrong house, you might carry out more than just dust. Man, that was a pretty creepy story. Imagine doing contracting jobs and you encounter a sealed room with all this voodoo stuff on there. It's like taped up. It's like trying to keep something in there. Personally, if it was me, I'd be like, nope, I'm done. Guys, if you guys want me to do this, you guys gotta pay me double or triple the price that I originally charged you. And to be honest, the owners were being a little bit like weird too. Like they already knew the problem, but they're like, oh, maybe it will be okay, yada, yada, yada. And lo and behold, this room was haunted by a ghost child. It even followed him home. Anyways, let's continue on to the next story. This happened to me when I was working night security at a small office building in Fresno. At the time, I was trying to make extra money while taking classes during the day, so the overnight shift seemed perfect. It was quiet, and I got paid a little better. I thought that it would also give me some time to study. At least, that was the plan. But you know how plans go in scary stories. The moment someone says a job is quiet, that usually means that the quiet is hiding something. The building wasn't big. It had 3 floors, a small parking lot, and a couple of different businesses inside. On the first floor, there was a tax office and a dental clinic. On the second floor, there was an insurance agency, home care company, a couple of other random businesses up there, and the last and final third floor had a few empty suites, some storage rooms, and a random law office that always smelled like coffee, even when nobody was there. During the day, the place felt normal. People came in holding folders full of tax papers, kids were waiting for some tutorings, people walking out of the dental clinic, and people were always asking me where the bathroom was, even though there were signs everywhere. At night, though, it felt completely different. After 9 p.m., the building became, how should I say it, hollow. The lights in the hallway stayed on, but they had that weak fluorescent glow that makes everything look slightly dead. The air smelled like cleaning solution, old carpet, and leftover food from office microwaves. My job was simple. I had to sit at the front desk, watch the cameras, and do a walkthrough every hour, lock any doors that people forgot to lock, and made sure that nobody broke in. Easy money, or at least that's what I thought. The first few nights were boring. I brought my laptop, watched the camera monitors, and tried to study. But mostly, I just drank gas station coffee and regretted saying yes to a job where every sound after midnight made me sit up straight. The building had the normal late-night noises. Pipes ticking, vents humming, the elevator settling, random little pops from the walls. At first, I told myself that was all it was, just old building noises. Then, on my 4th night, the elevator doors opened by themselves. It was around 1:17 a.m. I remember the time because I had just looked at the clock and thought, wow, it's only 5 more hours of pretending I'm not scared of empty hallways. The elevator doors opened in the lobby with that soft ding. I looked up from my laptop, expecting maybe a late worker who had come down from one of the offices, but nobody stepped out. I waited, and the elevator stayed open. Then, the doors closed. I checked the camera monitors. The first floor was empty, second floor was empty, and the third floor was also empty. The parking lot was empty except for my car. I shrugged it off because elevators can be weird. Maybe it was resetting, maybe somebody had pressed it earlier and it got delayed. I honestly have no idea how elevators work, and honestly, I didn't want to learn at 1 a.m. A few minutes later, though, the elevator opened again. This time, I walked over and looked inside. It was empty. The floor was clean, the lights were steady, nothing strange, except for one thing. On the button panel, for just a second, I saw a number 4 light up. Then it went dark. I stared at the panel. There was no 4th floor button. There were only buttons for 1, 2, and 3, plus the open, close, the alarm, and the basement key switch that only maintenance used. I stood there for a while, waiting for it to happen again, but nothing did. So I went back to my desk and told myself maybe the reflection from the hallway light had made the panel look strange. That explanation lasted until I checked the security cameras. One of the screens had changed. Usually, there were cameras for the lobby, parking lot, each hallway, and stairwells. But now one camera showed a hallway that I didn't recognize. The carpet was darker than the other floors. The walls were older, yellowed, and stained near the ceiling. There were no office signs, no exit signs, and no fire extinguisher cabinet. Nothing familiar. At the far end of the hallway, an old man pushed a cleaning cart. He was an old man, maybe in his late 60s or early 70s. He wore a faded blue work shirt, some pants, and a baseball cap. He moved slowly, like his knees hurt. He had one hand on the cart and the other holding a mop handle. At first, I thought that maybe he was part of the cleaning crew, and I had just not met him yet. But the cleaning crew finished before my shift started. They were never supposed to be there overnight. The old man stopped in the hallway and turned toward the camera. Then, he lifted one hand and pointed. The screen went black. I sat there frozen, my hand still on the mouse. I wanted to laugh it off, but my body already knew that it was not funny. There is a certain feeling you get when something sees you through a camera. It feels wrong because cameras are supposed to work one way. You watch the screen, and the screen does not watch back. The next morning, when the day guard came in, I asked if there was ever a 4th floor. He laughed and said no. He told me the building had only 3 floors and a basement storage area. I asked if an old janitor worked overnight. He said that the cleaning company sent 2 younger guys at around 7 p.m. and that they were always gone before 10. Then he asked why I wanted to know. I told him that the elevator was acting weird. He said, "Yeah, it does that sometimes." The way he said it bothered me. Not surprised, not curious, just like he had heard it before and did not want to talk about it. After that, things started happening almost every night. The elevator would open after midnight. Sometimes the doors opened in the lobby, and once in a while I would hear it ding upstairs while I was sitting at the desk. One time, during my walkthrough on the 2nd floor, the elevator opened behind me, and a cold breeze came out so strong it moved the papers taped to the office doors. Eventually, the cleaning cart started appearing on camera. Not in real life, but only on the monitors. I would check the third-floor hallway on the screen, and there it was, parked outside the law office. I would go upstairs to look, and the hallway would be empty. I would come back down, check the monitor, and now the cart would be somewhere else. It would be outside the tutoring center or near the stairwell. The old man would sometimes appear as well, always pushing the cart, always slow, and always stopping to point at something. At first, he pointed at the elevator. Then he pointed at the basement door. Then he pointed at a maintenance closet on the third floor. And that was when I started thinking that he was trying to show me something. I told myself that I was not going to investigate. I really did. I told myself that I was only getting paid hourly, not spiritually, and my paycheck wasn't enough to deal with this kind of stuff. My job was just to sit at a desk, drink my coffee, and mind my own business. But the problem is that once you realize something is trying to communicate, ignoring it feels even worse. It's like hearing someone knocking from inside a wall, and you can pretend that you didn't hear it, but you now know that someone might be trapped. A few nights later, during my 2 a.m. walkthrough, I reached the third floor and I smelled bleach. Not normal cleaning supply bleach, but strong, fresh bleach, like someone had just mopped a crime scene. The hallway floor was dry, but a wet trail ran from the elevator to the maintenance closet. It looked like someone had dragged a soaked mop across the carpet. I followed it. The trail ended at the closet door. The door was locked, but taped to it was an old work order. I had never seen it there before. The paper was yellow, curled at the corners, and the ink was faded. Most of it was hard to read, but one line stood out. Service wall sealed before final inspection. I took a picture of the paper with my phone, and the moment I did, the elevator dinged behind me. I turned around, and the doors opened. Inside stood the old janitor. Not on camera this time, in front of me. His face looked gray, almost waxy, and his shirt was wet down from the front. He stared at me with tired eyes like he had been waiting a long time and was disappointed that I was still too slow to understand. He lifted one hand and pointed down. Then, the elevator lights flickered. When they came back, he was gone. I ran down the stairs so fast I almost slipped. I spent the rest of the night at the front desk with every lobby light on, pretending to study while my brain replayed the old man's face over and over. When morning came, I showed the photo of the work order to the building manager. He looked at the picture for a long time. Then he asked where I had found it. I told him that I found it on the third floor maintenance closet. He said he had never seen the paper before and that the closet had been locked for years because it only held old wiring and pipes. On the paper, at the bottom, was a signature. I pointed to it and I asked if he knew who it belonged to. His face changed a little when I said it. He said that he did not know much, only that before the current owners bought the building, there had been an older janitor who disappeared. People said that he quit and went back to live with relatives. That was the story. But he didn't sound convinced. I asked if there were records, and he told me that perhaps there was in the basement storage. That night, I did not want to go back, but I needed the cash. That's how they get you in real life. It's never bravery, it's rent and bills. So I showed up with coffee, a flashlight, and a little string my mom tied on my wrist after I made the mistake of telling her the part of what happened. She told me not to call out to anything, and she told me not to promise anything, and that if I had saw the spirit, I should just speak to it respectfully, but not invite it to follow me home. It was very comforting advice from my mom, basically. At around 1:30 a.m., the elevator opened again, and this time, the basement key switch was already turned. Even though it did not have the key in it. The doors waited. I stood there staring, and the elevator dinged softly, like it was getting impatient. I said out loud, "I'm going only to look. I'm not going with anyone." The door stayed open, so I stepped inside. The elevator then went down. There was no button pressed, it just moved. When the doors opened, I was in the basement. The basement was mostly storage, old chairs, decorations, files, and broken printers. There was some random equipment that people didn't want to throw away. The air down there was cold and dusty. The flashlight beam caught little pieces of dust floating around like dead snow. At the end of the basement hallway, I saw the cleaning cart. It was real now. A metal bucket sat on top of it, filled with black water. A mop leaned against the handle. On the top tray was an old badge. I picked it up and wiped dust from the plastic. The badge had a picture of the old janitor. Behind the cart was a section of wall that looked newer than the rest. The paint was slightly different. The trim didn't match, and I moved closer and saw scratch marks low on the wall, half covered by paint. Beside the wall was an old filing cabinet with a broken drawer. Inside, I found some maintenance logs. Most were boring, light repairs, plumbing issues, but then I found one folder from years earlier. It mentioned an unpermitted renovation, a crawl space behind a wall, and a complaint that a janitor had gone missing after reporting a leak near the elevator shaft. There was no police report in the folder, no follow-up, just a note written in red pen that said, "Do not discuss with tenants." My hands went cold. I kept digging and found a sealed envelope tucked into the back. Inside were copies of emails between the old building owner and the contractor. From what I could understand, during the renovation, a wall had been sealed too early. The janitor had been checking the leak behind that wall, and after that, nobody saw him again. Instead of stopping the work and searching properly, they assumed that he had left. Or maybe they wanted to assume that. Then I heard a sound behind the new wall. Tap, tap, tap. 3 slow taps. I stepped back. A voice, very faint, whispered, "Tell my family." I almost cried right there, not because it was loud or scary, but because I was so scared. The whisper sounded like someone who had been saying the same things for years and was afraid nobody would ever listen. The next day, I brought the folder to the manager, and to his credit, he didn't ignore it. Maybe he had been waiting for proof too. The building owners were contacted, then the police, then contractors, and I wasn't allowed in the building for a few days. Then they found remains behind a sealed service wall. It was the old janitor. His family had been told years earlier that he had probably abandoned the job and left. Imagine that. An elder works hard, disappears, and instead of being brought home properly, people treat him like he walked away from his responsibility. His children spent many years angry and confused, never knowing that he had died inside the same building he was cleaning. After they identified him, his family came. I met his daughter and their oldest son, and they were much older than me, very quiet and very respectful. After his family came to retrieve his body, I would say that the building felt different. I know that sounds vague, but it did. The air felt lighter, the hallway lights stopped flickering, the elevator stopped opening at night. For a while, I thought it was finally over. Then, about a month later, I came in for my shift and found something waiting by the elevator. It was a clean mop bucket. Inside was fresh water. The mop was wrung out and placed neatly across the top. On the wooden handle, written in black marker, was my name. I checked the cameras, and nobody had brought it in. It was not there at 10:12 p.m., but on the next frame at 10:13, it just magically appeared, sitting by the elevator. I stood there, looking at it for a very long time. I was scared, of course, because when something appears out of nowhere with your name on it, you do not feel relaxed, but I also didn't feel threatened. It felt more like a thank you. A strange one, yes, but a very haunted janitor kind of thank you. Still a thank you, though. I told my mom, and she warned me to not bring it home. She told me to leave it where it was, to just be respectful to it and say that I was glad that he found his family. So I did. The next morning, it was gone. I don't work there anymore, but I still think about that building sometimes, especially when I see office cleaners working late at night. People walk past them like they're invisible. They empty trash, mop the floors, wipe bathrooms. They clean up after everybody, and most people never learn their names. Maybe that's why this story stayed with me. Wow, that was a pretty sweet story. The spirit of the old janitor trying to communicate with the security guard to help him find his family, as well as to go to heaven. Pretty sweet. But personally, that's a little shady how, things like that can get covered up. Maybe, that's what happens when you have a lot of money. You can just smack people with money and be like, hey, forget about that weird occurrence, why that janitor's gone. We're just going to seal this wall up, And honestly, I'm glad that the manager of that building was like, yeah, you found the documents. Let's go somewhere with this. But at the same time, that manager could have done it a long time ago. You know what I'm saying? But perhaps that was out of his pay grade. Like maybe it was just kind of like a, like a rumor that he heard. And he's like, oh, there's probably like no real evidence behind it. But then the security guard started getting these communications from the janitor, and that's when the manager was like, hey, maybe this is actually not just rumors after all, and something really did go down. So I don't think the manager was at fault for that, but the old owners for sure. Maybe they got caught and locked up in jail. But let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section below. You also might like this video on screen according to YouTube, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so I can continue to buy adult beverages for myself to drink. Thank you.